Hello, friends. Welcome back to another weekly NBA Insider video live stream notebook right here on the Bleacher Report app and available on YouTube as well. We got a new background, but we have plenty of new information as well as we are coming to you live Tuesday, January 13th, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. 2 days away from the next big date on the NBA trade market calendar, where plenty of free agents who sign later in the summer will become eligible to be traded. And we are just over 3 weeks away from the February 5th, 3 p.m. Eastern Time buzzer, when the actual deadline will sound and all the business will stop until the offseason. So things got started off, though, last week. If you recall, we came to you Tuesday in the middle of the throes of the Washington Wizards and the Atlanta Hawks talking Trae Young, and that deal got finalized roughly 24 hours later, last Wednesday night. The final terms, Trae Young to the nation's capital and CJ McCollum's expiring $30 million salary, in addition to Corey Kispert, the wing sharpshooter out of Gonzaga, who's in the first year of a 4-year deal that pays roughly $13 million in average annual value. They go back to the Hawks. Now, there was some buzz around the league that maybe that could have turned into a 3-team trade. There was some talk that maybe Corey Kispert could have been heading elsewhere, but we definitely have heard since that Coach Quinn Snyder is a big proponent of Corey Kispert. And I talked to several people around the Hawks who fully believe that Kispert's shooting and his cutting and his overall skill set will be very complementary as another wing piece around Jalen Johnson's primary playmaking, now that the Hawks have fully turned the page from the Trae Young era, 7 years of Ice Trae out of Oklahoma, that trade on draft night that flipped him for Luka Doncic, and now this iteration of the Atlanta Hawks under new general manager Ansi Sala. Everyone in that building, I can tell you quite confidently, they believe that this is Jalen Johnson's team moving forward, and every other move from here on out, whether that's still pursuing an injured Anthony Davis, whether that's going elsewhere on the center market, whether they look at finding another backcourt creator because CJ McCollum is going to be on an expiring deal and probably is on an expiring deal and probably is not long for an Atlanta tenure in seasons, future, being that he's on the other side of 30. And this is a team with Jalen Johnson at 22, 23 years old, Dyson Daniels and Zachary Ricochet right along with him, Keel Alexander-Walker, their major free agent addition from this year, just 26 still. So the Hawks created a ton of flexibility with that expiring deal from CJ McCollum. They'll have that deal to flip right now, in addition to, they can't aggregate him, but they've got Kristaps Porzingis' expiring contract that they could combine with some other players to go out and make a move. Or regardless, they're going to have a lot of free agency flexibility with cap space this summer. So it's a real changing of the guard and a new chapter in Atlanta with a ton of financial flexibility. For Washington, why do they do this? That was definitely a question that was on my mind in the beginning when we first found out, when my partner Mark Stein, the Hall of Famer, on our Substack brought out the news that Washington was a legitimate landing spot for Trae Young. I'll tell you, my first thought was, why are the Wizards doing this? They need to chase lottery balls this year. Their first round pick, their own pick, is top 8 protected. And if they fall below that number 8 threshold, that pick is going to New York. So adding on principle, adding a 4-time All-Star point guard would definitely help the Wizards get better, but it would not help their quest of being bad enough to keep that pick in a loaded draft where the entire league is seeing multiple franchise-changing talents at the top of this class. But the more we sifted through this, the more this deal came together, and it was clear that it was just Trae Young for CJ McCollum and Corey Kispert, and no draft capital going back either direction. To me, it's a pretty big win for any team that doesn't actually have a clear-cut identity, that doesn't have any real infrastructure in place in terms of a marquee long-term starter at a position in the lineup. Sure, Alex Sarr has taken some steps forward this year And there's definitely a lot of optimism internally in Washington that he will be the center of the present and future for the Wizards. And they like Keyshawn George. There's some optimism about what Trey Johnson can become. But Trae Young, who you see on the screen right there, is a four-time All-Star that the Wizards essentially got for an expiring contract and a sixth man type of player in Corey Kispert. That's a very low cost of operating for the Wizards to bring in that type of talent. And with Trae Young being currently sidelined with a quad contusion, he had an MCL sprain earlier in the year. By all accounts, the Wizards are going to take their sweet, sweet time in letting Trae Young come back from these injuries. There's not a lot of expectation he's going to play much this year. So to that regard, I don't think he'll be on the floor to the point where it's going to impact Washington's record all that consequentially. And when he is healthy, whether this year or next, he is going to be an absolute upgrade from a table setter, floor general standpoint. While Trae gets a knock for being someone who chucks it a lot and takes a lot of jumpers, he's still one of the best pick and roll operators in the league and an elite passer, an elite playmaker that this Wizards team was missing. CJ McCollum's a great scorer and a great playmaker in his own right, but internally in Washington, the Wizards were looking for added playmaking, added point guard play that will help feed all of these young lottery picks and help aid their development, as opposed to a veteran stopgap who was just there to keep advertising to the league that he's worthy of being in the NBA and making a pretty high salary. So that kind of does it to round up all of our news and notes for the first big trade of trade season. Let's get to the chat here. Mike Larry wants to know Kuminga to Orlando for Wendell Carter. That's a very random thought. I don't know. I have not heard anything about that. We got a lot of Ja questions here. Ellipsis wants to know how realistic is it that Ja gets moved. Gentle Panda says Ja on the Spurs. I would be absolutely floored if San Antonio wanted to disrupt everything positive they're building around Victor Wembanyama to bring in another point guard, another guard, when they already have De'Aaron Fox, Steph Castle, and Dylan Harper doing things, having San Antonio as the number 2 seed in the Western Conference, making that march all the way to the NBA Cup championship game, beating OKC 3 times this year. They play tonight. I'll be locked into that game for the 4th matchup between those two teams. Ola99 says Miami on anything. Let's take it to Ja Morant on our rundown here, because I think the Heat still loom as one of the more likely landing spots for Ja Morant. I don't think there's going to be a robust market for Memphis's 2-time All-Star guard, just like we saw with Trae Young. Look, we've been reporting on our Substack, the Stein line, and I've been saying it here every week, talking about Trae Young, Ja Morant, and LaMelo Ball as potential trade candidates this year. Trae's already gotten dealt, and now Memphis has come out, and privately, they are signaling widely around the league that they are looking to move him and they want to welcome offers, which is something that they shut down in the past. This time last year, I always think it's interesting to make calls the Friday after the trade deadline and the Monday after the deadline and kind of get a sense on things that didn't get done. And a lot of people were starting to whisper, I think Memphis they're starting to listen a little bit on Ja. And the Grizzlies just shut that down. If you remember, Zach Kleiman came out and said, rival teams can want Ja all they want, but we're not moving him. So this is a big turn of events. This is a big formal change in the Grizzlies listening on Ja. But I still don't think that's going to change them having a significant market for him, because the off-court stuff with his activity in clubs and posting on Instagram with firearms and what have you, that's all one thing. Then you have to add into the fact that he's been attacking the paint less. He's been shooting more, and his efficiency is down. He's shooting like around 20% from 3 this year. And this is all after Memphis fired their longtime head coach, Taylor Jenkins, to promote their Finnish assistant coach, Tuomas Isalo, to run more of a pick and roll centric scheme that kind of split the double team and launched play from Ja that you're seeing right there, the stuff that put him in conversation to be the face of the league in years past. That stuff has largely gone by the wayside as he's been protecting his body more and not getting into the paint as much. Then on another degree, any executive I've talked to in the league about this, they all mention that Ja has had as troubling of an injury history of late as any player in the league. He's constantly in and out of the lineup. He's out right now with another quad injury at this moment. There's some optimism that he might play as the Grizzlies are currently overseas in Berlin to play against Orlando, and then they're going to go to London as well. So we might see him back in the fold soon. But I'm telling you, I've been surprised all year long at just how much his injury concern has been mentioned to me over and over again by other teams about what that will look like and impact his trade market. And it's caused some real trepidation from a lot of teams to make a move on him. So what exactly does his market look like outside of a potential offer from Miami? You know, I've seen a ton of questions about Minnesota, and I've heard it very reliably, and I've written this last week, that I don't expect the Timberwolves, as much as they're looking for point guard improvements, I don't think the Timberwolves have any real interest in trading multiple members of their rotation to upgrade at the guard spot. They value their depth. That's something that Minnesota has valued dating back to when they traded Karl-Anthony Towns before last season and turned his contract into two legit starters in Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo in a deep Western Conference. The Wolves hope that depth is something that helps them compare against the OKCs and the San Antonios and Houston and whoever. Denver went at full strength, who they've gone toe to toe with year over year. So I think that is largely the landscape right now for Ja Morant. It's going to be quiet. And I even think that Sacramento, who gets mentioned, isn't going to be making a super aggressive move for Morant at this juncture. I saw something in the comments about Noah LaRoche, the former Grizzlies assistant, who basically Ja had run out of town, being an offensive coaching consultant for the Heat this year and kind of the architect of this free-flowing isolation, no pick-and-roll offense that Miami has had some success with. And look, it's a weird dynamic, without a doubt, to go from an assistant that got fired after 1 year in Memphis for essentially running that Grizzlies offense to then him being a key piece of the scheme that the Heat are using this year. It does not mesh with adding Ja. However, I would be surprised if the Pat Riley, Andy Ellsberg talent play Heat organization is going to be dissuaded from a move that they really want to do, if it's a move they really want to do. There's one thing where you're calling and checking and seeing what the asking price is. There's another when you're pitching and making offers and putting recent first round selections like Jaime Jaquez or Kasparis or Nikola Jovic. I'm just naming names. I'm not saying that those are guys that the Heat have offered, to be clear, but that's a big difference. However, I don't think that having a coaching consultant, someone who's not even full-time on the staff, who did not mesh with Ja a year ago, I would just be surprised that would be someone who would stand in the way if that's what Pat Riley wants to do. So we'll see. It's early. The impression I definitely gathered from the phones last week and through today is that Memphis is not rushing through this. I don't think they have anything near the finish line like the Wizards and the Hawks came quickly with Trae Young. So they're going to wait this thing out. I would be absolutely floored if Ja's traded before the Grizzlies come back from this European trip. And just from a logistics standpoint, Zach Kleiman can't really be on the phone talking to other teams to the same fluency that he would have if he was here in a United States time zone compared to being 6-7 hours ahead in Europe. So I think that's also probably going to be something that creates some type of not friction, but a slower development for his trade outcome here. Kate Gubert, my guy, keeps saying, give me Bulls news, give me Bulls talk. We're going to get to that later down in big names to watch. I promise you, Kate Gubert. Have the Lakers looked into trading for Pat Williams and Aya? There's another Bulls question. I know the Lakers are looking, that's from JP Briggs. I know the Lakers are looking all across the wing market. I'd be absolutely shocked if they wanted to go at Pat Williams and get his 4 years left of his deal at 18 average annual value. I think they're probably looking at much more flexibility and wanting to be, maintaining financial flexibility as opposed to putting Pat Williams' contract on their books. Pat Williams does not have positive value on the league. I don't think anyone is going out and like seeking him out. For now, we'll go back to our rundown and get back to the chat a little bit later on. Because the latest on Giannis Antetokounmpo, since we last spoke to you guys here, my colleague Sam Amick at The Athletic had a one-on-one with Giannis that kind of basically said that he's not going to be asking out for a trade. And to me, that just all but guarantees he's not going to be moved before the trade deadline now. But he's basically said it on the record that today that could change. And when Giannis has an opportunity to sign a massive contract extension with the Bucks this summer, if he does not sign it, that's not him asking out, but that's him signaling to the Bucks, I don't want to be here anymore. And that will be kind of an out for Giannis to be able to move on from the Grizzlies and not be the bad guy, which it doesn't matter if it's Giannis. It doesn't matter if it's James Harden leaving Houston or James Harden leaving Brooklyn or James Harden leaving Philadelphia, Damian Lillard leaving Portland, Bradley Beal leaving Washington. I've been doing this for 13 years now, covering the NBA. I've been in this insider role for 4.5 now. Just time and again, all these guys, they don't want to be the bad guy. They don't want to raise their hand and say, I want out of here, and feel this vitriol from their fan base that thinks they're turning their back. So I think that's where this is headed. Giannis coming out on the record pretty strongly and saying, I'm not going to ask for a trade, to me, all but puts any potential move for him right now completely on the back burner, because the Bucks have repeatedly signaled that they're not going to move him unless he says he wants out. So that staring contest is going to remain past February 5th. And that's kind of the landscape. But that's not the end of it, because if Giannis is going to be potentially declining this extension and available for trade this summer, then there are going to be plenty of teams who hold their powder, hold their draft capital, hold their prized blue chip prospects, and don't make a big move because they're going to hope that Giannis is available. If you're the Toronto Raptors, for example, are you really going to put your best offer on the table for an Anthony Davis or a Domantas Sabonis, knowing that you could potentially go after Giannis 4 months from now? And the same thing goes for Miami. The same thing goes for anyone who's been clutching their assets and holding them tight and waiting for the right guy to go after. So in the meantime, I think we're just going to be waiting to see what type of move the Bucks can do. Are they going to be doing anything of consequence? Are they going to find a trade that makes it worthwhile of flipping Kyle Kuzma and Bobby Portis and something else and going out and adding someone? I mean, to me, everything I've heard from around the league, they're looking at everyone from Ja to Zach LaVine to Anthony Davis to Jeremy Grant. They're going to keep canvassing the league and seeing what opportunities are out there. But I don't know. I see someone typing in a question right now. K Polk says, do I think MPJ will end up with the Bucks? Like, Michael Porter Jr. absolutely has to be someone that the Bucks are considering. He's having an all-star caliber season in Brooklyn. They've got the salaries to match. And if they really wanted to put an unprotected pick on the table in 2031, the Nets just took that with Michael Porter Jr. back for Cam Johnson a year ago from Denver, a 2031 unprotected pick. So I'd have to imagine that would get the Nets' attention. I definitely think Milwaukee's going to factor into the MPJ conversation if the Nets do ultimately end up moving him, because there is some thought that maybe Brooklyn would want to keep him, either to be a piece of this next iteration of Brooklyn as they try to get back into the East, or to be an outgoing salary for someone they want to pitch. Maybe they want to hold MPJ to try to trade him for Giannis themselves this summer. Those are all these kind of varying factors that any front office is going to be factoring. Are we going to want to make a move now compared to what that same type of move could net us in the summer. It's exactly what Phoenix considered with Kevin Durant this time last year before ultimately moving him to Houston in June. Randy B in the chat says Zach to Milwaukee for Kuz and Portis. I'm assuming that's Zach LaVine. Zach LaVine's definitely been someone Milwaukee's looked at for a long time now. That's really the only team I've heard for Zach LaVine that Milwaukee's looking at him. YouTube link in bio says, should Miami trade Bam? I don't think Miami has any plans on trading Bam out of bio whatsoever. TJM0251 is asking, am I hearing anything on the Cavs front? And I think Cleveland is just like a lot of teams that are kind of in the middle of the bunch in their respective conference. They're waiting until they get closer to the deadline for more of a sample size. Teams are going to still have 5, 7, 8 games left before, maybe even more than that, upwards of 10 games before the trade deadline on February 5th to kind of really get a clearer sense of where their team's at and how they factor into this deadline. For now, I think the Cavs are on pause and they're waiting to make any real decision. But if they do find themselves still in this play-in tournament muck, then I think you will start to see Cleveland potentially listen on Jared Allen and Darius Garland and DeAndre Hunter. And Hunter will be easily the first piece of their starting caliber group that the Cavs would look to move from a sheer cost-cutting standpoint. They're in the second apron right now, and they're not where they want to be for having the league's highest payroll. Will the Hawks make any more trades? We kind of touched on that earlier. I think Atlanta is absolutely looking to be opportunistic. They've got a lot of expiring salaries. They've got salaries that can combine with Kristaps Porzingis to make something happen, but I don't think Atlanta's like pressed to do something. I don't think they absolutely want to make a move. I think they're just looking and searching, and they are going to call and they could make a move, but I don't think they're like definitively saying we want this. DePluva's asking, Hawks don't want Anthony Davis. Right. I think they do. I think Atlanta is still sniffing around the periphery of what Dallas can be getting for their big man right now. Speaking of big men, Celtics Pats 43 wants to know if the Celtics should trade Anthony. I mean, that's definitely been the word out of Boston all season long, that if they're going to move Anthony Simons, they're trying to look at big men moves and can they flip him for some type of center. They've been linked to Ivica Zubac and others. Can they find some type of starting center? Because right now, Zubac doesn't really seem to be so available. Can they find a starting center to flip Anthony Simons for? Will they have to attach draft capital to do so? Those are kind of all the questions that Boston is having to answer. Graham 18 wants to know any smaller, less splashy, non-Kuminga Warriors noise. Well, let's take that to our next item here, because no, I have not heard anything in Golden State outside of things they're looking at with Jonathan Kuminga, because he becomes eligible to be traded 2 days from today, and there's not a very robust market for him right now. We know Sacramento is interested in him. I reported yesterday that the Lakers have some interest in him. They checked in on the summer. The Lakers are continuing to look at all options on the 3-and-D wing market right now, and they're not finding so many. So of course, Jonathan Kuminga is on their list. But I think both of those teams, to get him being Kuminga, they're going to need to find some type of 3-team arrangement, because the Warriors have made it very clear they have no interest in Malik Monk. And I don't think the Warriors want to move Kuminga for some combination of Gabe Vincent, Jared Vanderbilt, Maxi Kleber that the Lakers have to offer and send out as well. So what type of 3-team agreement can Golden State manufacture here? Will they be able to find something with Chicago? There's been a ton of noise about Kobe White, and rightfully so, being that he is up for unrestricted free agency this summer. He's only making $12 million by comparison to the Ja Morants and the Trae Youngs, and even Colin Sexton's making $20 million. And CJ McCollum, who just got moved, of course, makes $30 million. So for Kobe White to be on a deal below the mid-level exception. It's a very easy salary figure to get to if you're any team. Is there some type of connection between Chicago, who has definitely liked Kuminga in the past? The Warriors and the Bulls have had trade deadline discussions for several years now. Back when Zach LaVine was on the roster, I talked about Nikola Vucevic ad nauseum. The real guy Golden State always wanted, and that Kuminga came up for in trade talks with Chicago, was always Alex Caruso. There was a deadline. I forget exactly what year it was, but before Caruso got dealt to OKC, so maybe 22, 23, one of those two, where the Warriors thought they had to trade it locked in for Alex Caruso, and I think Kuminga would have been in that deal. So the Bulls have always been interested. Will there be enough synergy to get something done? That's the question. I think, to me, I've gotten it pretty reliably that Nikola Vucevic is not going to be enough to make something happen there for Golden State to send Kuminga to Chicago. So we'll see what ends up happening there. But since we're a little bit running out of time here, let's keep it moving right along to big names to watch on our trade market, because I see a question here for Born for Purpose 88. What are the chances that Herb Jones's asking price goes down? I don't think the Pelicans are going to be factoring into any of these trade conversations from a selling standpoint. They've been signaling loud and clear that they don't want to move Zion. They don't want to move Trey Murphy. They don't want to move Herb Jones. So that's going to leave a market of, I think a dearth of sellers right now. And we're waiting to see which teams are actually going to shift into that. We talked about Michael Porter Jr. a bit. I mean, right now, with Anthony Davis hurt and his trade prospects an absolute question mark, with Trae Young already moved, I think Michael Porter Jr. is the biggest name on the market right now, especially being that he's someone in the right scenario that's already proven he can help in a starting lineup compete for a championship, as he did in Denver. Now, his situation at this point is so much different. He's the number one option in Brooklyn, and he's absolutely thriving in that capacity. But I think he's auditioning right now to be a legitimate number 2, number 3 piece for someone else. To me, the team that makes the most sense, I mean, we talked about Milwaukee. I think he makes a ton of sense in Detroit. I have not been told yet that Detroit has called on Michael Porter Jr., but I have been told that they have at least discussed him internally. And I think that makes a ton of sense, because as good as the Pistons are leading the Eastern Conference wire to wire here, they do not have a bona fide second scorer behind Kane Cunningham. And I think Michael Porter Jr. could be that guy. He is not an Anthony Davis or a Larry Markkinen who is going to cost you an arm and a leg, years of draft capital, and then also be on the books for $50-60 million moving forward. He's only at 36 right now, and I don't think he's in a position to be commanding 50-60 moving forward. God is asking, is MPJ to the Warriors a thing? He's definitely someone Golden State is looking at. But again, to go back to what we said about Sacramento and Los Angeles, and the Lakers are definitely looking at 3-and-D wings, which is why it makes sense that they would look at Jonathan Kuminga. Brooklyn does not like Jonathan Kuminga. If they did, they would have thrown him an offer sheet this summer or gotten involved and tried to sign and trade for him. They did not. So if the Nets are going to, if the Warriors are going to try to get MPJ from Brooklyn, they're probably going to need a 3-team deal sending Kuminga elsewhere as well. Other big names that we're looking at, Domantas Sabonis and DeMar DeRozan for sure. Sabonis has interest from Toronto. We've continued to report that, but it'll be tricky to find an agreement there, being that the Raptors, to my understanding, are really just trying to look at what they can get for a combination of Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett, and Jakob Poeltl. And the Kings do not want long-term salary on their books right now. But with DeMar DeRozan, there's this idea going around that he could be a major salary piece, maybe the biggest salary piece, if the Kings are going after Ja Morant. So that's something to monitor if you want to keep looking at potential Ja Morant trades, and especially if you're looking at the possibility of Ja Morant going to Sacramento. Will DeMar DeRozan and his expiring contract be a piece of that puzzle moving forward? That's something that we're definitely tracking moving forward. We keep getting all these questions about the Bulls. The longer that Josh Giddey is injured and this team is still floundering in the middle, I think that potentially leads Chicago to being more of a seller. So Nikola Vucevic on his expiring contract, we've been talking about him for 3 straight trade deadlines now. He's definitely a name that we're going to monitor. I mean, he's still putting up very efficient numbers. And now that his contract is finally in a 1-year deal and he's no longer on a 3-year, $60 million extension that the Bulls gave him, that I think everyone around the league believed was a above market deal, he has some more enhanced, I think, appeal than he did in years past, especially as dating back to when Chicago traded for him from Orlando, there's always been this expectation that Vucevic is going to fall off a cliff, and now he's clearly a negative defensively. So that'll be the question that teams have about him in terms of projecting him out to a postseason situation. But the offensive ability, the stretch shooting ability is, of course, there. It's always been there. Last name here is James Harden, because right now I'm not anticipating him to be a factor in all this. The Clippers have won 3 straight. They've won 8 of 10. And with Memphis above them in the standings, potentially shifting into a tank mode, I think there's a clear path for the Clippers to get into this play-in tournament in earnest and make some noise. So I'm not expecting it right now, but it's only Tuesday, January 13th. Depending on how things go, James Harden does have a no trade clause, which means he could kind of inherently control his market. And it'll be interesting to follow what happens for him, especially in a market that doesn't really have, so much competition on the point guard landscape right now. Lastly, teams lurking for trades. I see it in the chat. The Rockets need a point guard. J91002 says that. And yes, as Houston's on a 3-game losing streak, the Rockets are getting closer and closer to their ability to make some moves and still fall short of the first apron that they are hard capped at. So that's a spot we're looking at. Plenty of questions about, will Detroit make any moves? They've been signaling pretty loudly that they don't want to rush this thing. They don't want to take, they don't want to move their chips into the table too early and risk this like slow, methodical growth that they've had. And by slow, methodical growth, I mean they haven't really done much. They've just grown internally and their guys have taken steps forward. They haven't moved their chips in. They've just made some minor moves, bringing in Dennis Schroeder at last deadline, taking Karis LeVert and Duncan Robinson in free agency. So what will Detroit actually have the appetite for is a big question. Joshua Gregory is asking that, any Pacers center targets. Indiana is called on every top 40 center in the league. They are definitely looking for big men. That's something that we're going to continue to monitor as well. And again, as we talked about throughout this show, as Laughing Firefly asked, do I believe the Bucks will actually make a trade for an athletic forward who plays defense? Like, the Bucks are clearly shopping. They're clearly looking for help on the wings, and that's what they want. They want an athletic forward who can be switchable and help upgrade this team on the defensive side of the ball. So we gave you guys a ton today. I'm tired. I've been talking for way too long, but we appreciate all the engagement in the chat as always. I appreciate the Snap production team here furnishing me with this beautiful background today. And we're going to bring it to you live again next Tuesday, January 20th at 5 p.m. Eastern time. And we're going to keep coming to you guys a lot more as we get closer to the February 5th trade deadline. But for now, keep it locked here on the Bleacher Report app and on YouTube. And if you're not already subscribed, please join us over on Substack at markstein.substack.com. For now, that's it for today. Appreciate you guys. Enjoy the games tonight.